Thank you very much, Kevin, for that very, very helpful and very clear summary for us of the implications of the Hunt report. I'm going to ask our next speaker, Padraig Walsh, to actually, he's currently being fitted with his microphone. So I'm going to ask Padraig to come up because I believe that as I introduce him to you, I think not everybody will know Padraig. Most people in the university sector will know him, but many of us in our sector may not yet have met him. So if Padraig could come up, because I believe that when you're abusing something, it should be within striking distance. Now, can I just say to you that I don't know whether, looking around me, I think very few people here would actually have suffered in the days of the Catechism when it was beaten into you. But those of you who do remember it, remember the question, what is the Blessed Trinity? And I have to tell you, the closest thing on earth in Ireland these days to the Blessed Trinity is Padraig Walsh. And let me explain that, because Padraig is actually Chief Executive Designate of Qualifications and Quality Assurance Ireland, but also is Chief Executive of HETAC, of NQAI, and IUQB. I was going to say three persons in one and the same divine person, but I didn't clear that with your family, Padraig. But can I say that Padraig, in fact, has, by way of background, Padraig's experience as senior lecturer in bioprocessing engineering at Dublin City University and director of quality promotion at that university. He studied engineering in UCD, qualified with B, chemical, and he holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Missouri, USA, and also a PhD in chemical and biochemical engineering from UCD. Padraig is also currently a member of the Scotland Committee, of the UK Quality Assurance Agency, Higher Education, of the Scientific Advisory Board, of the Centre for Accreditation and Quality Assurance at the Swiss Universities, of the Council of Appeals, of the Agency for Evaluation and Accreditation of Higher Education in Portugal, and the Steering Committee of the European University Association Institutional Evaluation Programme. So you can see Padraig is very much a European. And after all of that, I think HETAC, IUQB, and NQI are very chicken feed. I was actually trying to dig out some scandal, in fact, on Padraig. You know, I mean, as behoves the person who was to introduce him. And I thought perhaps, in fact, I might actually be able to tell you that, in fact, the purpose of the membership of the Swiss organisation was so that he could lodge his extra 2 salaries into the Swiss bank account. But unfortunately, my exhaustive researches were only able to establish that there is only 1 salary despite 3 functions. So I think, in fact, your Swiss trips are confined to the excitement of quality assurance. So without further ado, I hand over to Padraig, who is actually going to update us on the amalgamation process of the various bodies. Thank you, Padraig, for being to speak to us today.
Okay, thanks. As I've said on a number of occasions, I'm supposed to be the embodiment of doing more with less. But the 4 organisations there that have been highlighted. One thing I was able to look at is I think there are only 2 colours that overlap in them, so we may have the makings of a logo without offending people somewhere in that. I'm hoping that all of these titles will merge into one pretty soon. And I'm comforted with the fact that Kevin is telling me the Minister is proceeding with alacrity on it. And the whole amalgamation was never really politically contested, and the incoming government have affirmed the process. So that I think that's to be welcomed by all. Dermot's already gone through my background there. So I spent 20 or 17 years as a lecturer in bioprocess engineering. I think it helps in the whole area of higher education to actually occasionally have stood up in front of people and given lectures and supervised PhD students, etc. It can be a useful thing to have done in the process. And I moved on. I've been in the area of quality assurance for the last 10 years or so. The announcement, which people remember took place in October 2008, that's a long time ago, it's 2.5 years ago, of the rationalisation of state agencies. The idea being to amalgamate NQAI, HETAC and FETAC, which, to remember, were always intertwined. These were never absolutely individual organisations. So the groups have worked together within that, and that's been a great assistance to me in that people are familiar with the staff. The new organisation also is going to take responsibility for the formal, like, external quality assurance review of the university, which I've been involved with for the last 5 years through the Irish University's Quality Board, 6 years actually, and with the HEA. And at the time, the proposal was to look at, also looking at the relationship of some of the functions of the NUI and how that will look at in the organisation. And we'll see in the legislation how all of that will pan out. The progress to date then, the government actually as far back as January 2010 approved the general scheme of the bill, which provides for the establishment. Having gone through a process of consultation where most people in the sector, including HECA, had a submission on that process. The first meeting of the interim board took place on the 1st of February, and the interim board comprised of the chairs of the 4, if you like, amalgamating organisations. So there's already a process, if you like, of integration within that, and the chairs of those various bodies have had to wear 2 hats for the last year and a half or so. I was appointed as CEO of NQAI and take on the designate role of QQAI on the 1st of October, and on the 14th of February I was appointed as CEO of HETAC. So I do, luckily all of those bodies aren't too far apart from each other, but I do get out of bed in the morning and decide where will I go today and what turn will I take. So, but I do have a presence in all of the bodies, sometimes all 4 on the one day, but usually just one on a particular day. If we look at what the remit of QQAI is going to be, we said to people, if you're going to be a Quango, you might as well have 2 Qs in your name to start with. So, one of the purposes will be obviously to consolidate the existing statutory functions of the bodies that are there. Also to make the additional functions that particularly NQAI have picked up over the years and put them on a statutory footing, and also to take on some new statutory functions. Kevin has talked a bit about those, or what's likely to be in the bill itself. To consolidate, if you like, then the existing statutory functions, we're looking at the promotion, maintenance and further development and implementation of the National Framework of Qualifications. We shouldn't undersell this. There are lots of countries don't have one of these, and we are still preaching this to people all over Europe and all over the world, and as Kevin said, at a time when we have to repair an international reputation, it's important to note that in some areas of higher further education we are still seen as leaders. We are still invited to international conferences to give presentations on these things, and if we weren't contributing, people would stop very quickly, because you have to think twice anymore about putting anyone from Ireland up on a European list. So the fact that we're still being asked to contribute to these things, I think, is testimony to what people have built and developed. And that those frameworks of qualifications, one of the things I do say to people is that the existing framework of qualifications is largely described in a single line in the legislation in the 1999 Act. And everything from that has been developed by consultation and discussion among stakeholders, among the providers of education, which many of you represent here, and the people who are involved in the, if you like, the external accreditation, validation, quality assurance of it. So something to remember, the consultative approach and the not having too overly prescribed a system, that it has actually allowed us to develop that. We also have to look at formulating policy on quality assurance and the importance of enhancement. Enhancement over improvement, because enhancement to me is directed improvement. In other words, it's not improvement just happening. It's where you learn from it. You share experiences and you reflect good local practice into good international or good national practice. The review, monitoring of the effectiveness of providers' quality assurance procedures, the validation of programmes of education and training, and the review and monitor of those validated programmes. To look at the establishment of the standards of knowledge, skills and competence to be acquired by learners, for the organisation to make and promote its own awards, but I suppose more importantly, as I would see it, to delegate authority to make awards and to review and monitor those. So that system of developing, reviewing and monitoring, and there's a balance within that. At the start you develop and you review as appropriate and you monitor as appropriate. And the better the results of reviewing and monitoring, the less intrusive the whole process is. And you get the healthy balance that exists between internal and, as I would say, external quality assurance. That's a line that I feel should move. It should cycle over time, and there should be a healthy tension between regulators and developers, between the roles of internal and external quality assurance. We also have to look at making sure that we have policies in place whereby learners are protected. We have to determine policies, criteria for access, transfer and progression, monitor the implementation of those, and importantly we have to cooperate with international bodies in qualifications and quality assurance policies and their implementation. Many of these were the functions that were set for NQAI, HETAC and FETAC back in 1999, and that IUQB picked up through the Universities Act in 1997. But the advantage, I suppose, of developing new legislation is that we can restate the good of what's there. When the 1999 Act was set up, we were setting up stuff. We've had an opportunity in the last 12 years to look at how well this has worked. And I think, therefore, to hold on to the good bits and to look at fixing some of the problems, or at least making sure that we're not in a position whereby we cannot fix the problems because of some legislative constraints. So I think it's important that the legislation that we have is progressive within that. We've to liaise with awarding bodies outside the state for the purpose of facilitating the recognition in the state of awards of those bodies. And I put awarding bodies in red because there isn't a single consolidated definition of what an awarding body is. And I think we've had the chance over the last 12 years to really think about this function because it's actually quite important. To facilitate the recognition outside the state of awards made in the state. So although it's a national framework of qualifications we've developed, we also have to make sure that the qualifications from Ireland that people get when they go back, that they're recognised, and we also have to look at recognising the qualifications from outside for people that have come into Ireland. And the dynamic in that importance that has changed over time. For the last number of years, one of the most important things that NQAI did was look at recognising foreign qualifications, but we're getting increasing demands to also look at how we can assist people from Ireland who, through no fault of their own, have had to go abroad, and making sure that their qualifications are recognised. So again, we have something that's dynamic and cyclical coming out of that. The other chance I suppose we have is for the legislation is whereby a number of the additional functions that NQAI has acquired since its establishment. This is the most positive way that I can say this. Sometimes we can end up as a bit of a skip whereby some things need to be put somewhere, and in fact NQAI is quite a useful place to put them. The Qualifax, the Irish National Learners Database, ACELs, the Quality Assurance and Accreditation of English Language Schools, and the maintenance of the Internationalisation Register, which NQAI took over from the department earlier on this year. So there's a chance to look at making those functions statutory and how we can integrate all of those things into one new body. Again, just following up on something that Kevin had talked about, these are anticipated new functions. In other words, this is what we expect, or expect to be in the new legislation. The Code of Practice for the provision of programs of education training to international learners, the authorisation of the use of the quality mark by a provider. Important to notice there that it's the provider that's getting the quality mark, whereas when we're talking about the Internationalisation Register, we're talking about programs that are on that. To establish and maintain a database providing information on programs of education and training, and establishing and maintaining a register of providers. So all of that, if you like, I think provides a big challenge for an organisation in terms of how we present information. Some of those things that currently stand like Qualifax are what I would call a form of non-directive counsel. It's information that's up there, largely rebroadcast information. But the function of bodies that have actually gone through a process of an international code and a quality mark will be a statement of something more than just non-directive counselling, putting people towards a particular place. So the challenge of how a body that's responsible for making awards, quality assuring awards, validating awards, and also maintaining a register of providers, a database on programs, is one of the major challenges we see for the new body. But therefore, it's also one of the advantages, I think, of being able to consolidate all of this within one system. It will certainly, we hope, make it easier for providers to access into that.